been a hot minute since I've done a Dragon Ball video, so Dragon Ball fans, get ready because it's time. So a few weeks ago, I posted a voting poll asking which Dragon Ball video y'all thought I was going to be doing next. And while many of you thought and were seemingly wanting to Buu versus Cell, it was actually always going to be this, Piccolo versus Shin, or the Supreme Kai. I will do Cell versus the Buu at some point for sure, and it probably will be my next Dragon Ball video, but I've had this in mind for a long time now, and it's a fight that always left me curious and, I'm not gonna lie, a little bit salty. At least in terms of us fans being robbed of what I feel would have been an interesting match. If you don't remember, Piccolo and Shin were supposed to fight at the World Martial Arts Tournament in the Buu Saga, but Piccolo ended up forfeiting the match, seemingly out of fear that Shin was more powerful than him. Again, I say seemingly. So today, we're going to take a look at these fighters and see how this particular fight would have gone down. Although, for the sake of this hypothetical versus battle video, we'll say that the killer intent restriction of the World Martial Arts Tournament is taken out of this, since I don't think it would be as interesting to talk about a versus battle video like this if both characters are holding back. So let's begin with the scaling of the characters, starting with Piccolo. Now, I've talked about this a few times in the past, and I think people tend to underestimate Piccolo or just aren't really aware of how strong he could be. And to be fair, some of it can be up to interpretation, especially given how people choose to digest the series, at least in terms of power scaling. As in, if you go by the manga only, or you go by the anime only, or if you're of the opinion that both can be applied to power scaling. But for the sake of the fairness, I'll cover both sides. So I think the best place to start on Piccolo scaling is at the end of the Cell Saga. So to put it bluntly, Piccolo is at worst just below Vegeta and Trunks at the time of the Cell games. As in, when it comes to being an all-around combatant, he's more or less relative to them. And this is implied in the manga, and it's shown in the anime. In the manga, the chapter cover where Gohan explodes into Super Saiyan 2, it shows all the Z fighters fighting the Cell Juniors, and every one of them is on the ground, including a post-Cell fight Super Saiyan Goku, except for Trunks, Vegeta, and of course, Piccolo, implying that he's at least fighting relative to them against the Cell Juniors. Now, in the anime, it's full-on shown because Piccolo is literally the one putting in the most work against them. Now, there are a couple lines from both the manga and the anime that could contradict where Piccolo is in terms of power scaling, at least when it comes to the Saiyans. In the anime and the manga, Cell tells Gohan that there's no one except for Trunks and Vegeta that are holding their own against the Cell Juniors, not even Goku. But the anime clearly shows Piccolo still standing and fighting by the time Gohan goes into Super Saiyan 2. And in fact, Piccolo is the one that has to go and pick Goku up. There's also a line from Cell earlier in the arc when Goku forfeits and tells Cell that there's one person for him to fight. In both the original dub and Kai versions of the scene, Cell says, "Which one of these fighters do you have in mind? Trunks, Piccolo, Vegeta?" So this could imply that Cell is lumping Piccolo in with the likes of Trunks and Vegeta and considers him to at least be one of the fighters Goku is suggesting is strong enough to fight him. Now, just for the sake of making sure I brought it up, the manga version of this line does only include Vegeta and Trunks, so there is that. I guess the only argument I can make for that is that Piccolo is suppressed due to him wearing his weighted gear. Either way, TLDR, Piccolo is obviously just below Vegeta and Trunks in terms of raw power, and as a combatant, I think we can put him on their level. Now, fast forward to the Buu Saga, and if we take Piccolo at his word when he tells Gohan at the beginning of the Android Saga that Piccolo often trains when he's bored, then this means Piccolo would have definitely had to have trained in the 7-year time skip from the Cell Saga to the Buu Saga. As I'm pretty sure in that time span of Dragon Ball Z specifically, that is the longest period of time that the Z fighters were in a time of peace. That is, if you don't count the movies. So even if we want to say that Piccolo only trained for half of the time in those 7 years, that still means Piccolo would have at least had to train anywhere from 3 to 4 years. And we saw how Piccolo makes good use of his time training. During the 3-year time period in preparation for the androids, Piccolo went from being weaker than third form Frieza to being able to completely curb stomp Dr. Zero. And with just this 1 year of training in the hyperbolic time chamber, Piccolo went from being weaker than Imperfect Cell, albeit with thousands of humans absorbed, to being stronger than Semi-Perfect Cell. And this is also backed up by Dende in the anime saying to Mr. Popo that during Piccolo's training in preparation for the tournament, that Piccolo is stronger than he's ever been by this point. This would of course mean he's stronger than he was in the Cell game. Speaking of the tournament, something that I think most people tend to forget is that Piccolo wasn't aware of the rule that the Saiyans had to not go Super Saiyan during the World Tournament. Now, you could say that he may have already assumed this, but if we say he didn't, then this means Piccolo entered the tournament fully expecting to fight Goku, Vegeta, and Gohan while they were in Super Saiyan form. And what makes this kind of even more impressive is that Piccolo was going to also fight with his weighted gear on too. Now I'm sure at some point he would have taken it off, but he went into his fight with Shin, for example, and didn't really feel like he needed to take the weights off. Now, I'm not saying this is indicative of his success rate or anything, but I feel like it was worth bringing up. Now, with all this said, I'm not entirely saying Piccolo is trained as hard as Goku and Vegeta during the 7-year time skip, but we can definitely agree that he trained harder than Gohan. I think it's definitely agreeable that Piccolo is at least on the same level as the Saiyans in base, and to be honest, I think there's a fairly strong argument to be made that he's at least relative to them in the Super Saiyan form as well, as he was pretty much on their level by the time of the Cell games, and he has since kept up with his training, at least for the most part. Worst case, we could probably say that Piccolo could give Perfect Cell, as in the one that fought Super Saiyan Goku specifically, a pretty good fight, but I think that Super Perfect Cell, as in the one that got the Zenkai boost after self-destructing, would still be too strong for Piccolo. Now, where does this mean for Shin? Well, without getting too much into Cell versus Dabura territory, since I'll be covering that topic soon anyway, if we take Goku at his word and say that Cell and Dabura are on the same level, then this might already put Piccolo above Shin on its own. Because throughout most of the time during the time in Babidi's spaceship, the way the Supreme Kai talks about Dabura makes it seem as though he's no match for him. Like, it's implied in both the manga and the anime that the second Shin sees Dabura, he's about ready to call off the whole operation. Even with him having 5 other fighters there to help, even after hearing rumors about how strong Goku was, and even after seeing how strong Gohan is after powering up in front of Kibito, Shin still thinks Dabura being there is too much for them. Now, maybe you could say he felt the combo of both Babidi and Dabura was going to be too much, which, is fair, but even after seeing Goku and Vegeta fight both Pui Pui and Yakan and beating both of them, both of whom Shin thought they were tough enough that at least they would all have to fight them as a group, Shin still thought that they would all need to fight together to beat Dabura. Speaking of the fights with Pui Pui and Yakan, it's after both of these fights that the Supreme Kai says to himself that he's been surpassed by these Saiyans. And this is after Vegeta beats Pui Pui in base and Goku fights Yakan in Super Saiyan for not even more than a minute. As a matter of fact, Goku didn't even really need to go Super Saiyan for the strength boost, he just did it to trick Yakan. But this means that at the lowest scaling we can get for Piccolo here, as in if he's on the same level as the Saiyans in their base at worst, then this too already puts him above Shin. Now, I know there's a couple of counter arguments for this. One, Dabura sensed the fighters that were up at the hill, and Babidi said to choose the 3 strongest. Then Dabura proceeds to turn Piccolo into stone and have the other 3 Saiyans follow him into the spaceship. This, of course, means that Dabura thought Piccolo was weaker than them. But for one thing, you can still say this is the same thing as what Cell said in the Cell games, because you can argue that Piccolo was suppressed due to him having his weights on. And 2, while this does make sense narratively, just because he thought the Saiyans were stronger, it doesn't mean they were so much more powerful than Piccolo was. After all, they were all in base here at the time. So he could just mean that their power exceeded Piccolo's by even just a little bit. And then the second counter argument is that Piccolo kind of already lost to Dabura and it was pretty easy. This, of course, is referring to him being turned to stone, which I don't necessarily think is an anti-feat to use for Piccolo here, because for one thing, the Supreme Kai literally said, as they were already spat on, that he should have warned them about it. And for another thing, I mean, if we're being honest, most people in Dragon Ball don't just spit on their opponents in a fight. Like, for the most part, if it does happen, it's to be disrespectful or something. So maybe Piccolo thought it was the same thing here. Besides, Vegeta even says as much, that Dabura's spit is really the only problem. Aside from that, he's really not all that tough to beat, at least in terms to Vegeta. With all this in mind, I do think that at full power, Piccolo would give Dabura a pretty good fight. I definitely think he ultimately would do better than Gohan, all things considered. Because even with the gap in power, I doubt Piccolo's fighting instincts would be as lacking as Gohan was. Now, in defense of the Supreme Kai here, what I will say he has going for him is that he does have more feats in this arc than Piccolo does. But in all honesty, that's not really saying much, because he really only does 2 things against Buu and nothing else. Now, again, that's more than what we can say for Piccolo, but I think he prioritized Trunks and Goten's safety more than attempting a fruitless attempt to engage Buu. Now, I'm not trying to sound too dismissive of the Supreme Kai here. After all, in the manga, Piccolo straight up tells Goku that, yeah, Shin is considerably stronger than I am. And the Daijinju, or the data books, also state that Shin's power is far superior than Piccolo. And then there's also a statement somewhere that says Shin is pretty much on the same level as Super Saiyan Goku at the time of the Cell games. So if you are a straight manga statement or data book statement purist, then this on its own puts Shin above Piccolo. And to be fair, Shin has some unique abilities. I mean, for one thing, he's able to use telekinesis. He's able to paralyze people, even those who are at the same level as Super Saiyan 2 Gohan. He's able to create an energy shockwave that at least was strong enough to push back Majin Buu a little bit. He's capable of healing, though I'm not sure this applies to himself. Otherwise, I'm sure he would have just done so to himself while he was on the brink of death after his fight with Buu. He's also able to use an energy field for defense, and if we assume it's at least on the same level as Babidi's, then it could hold Piccolo off for a little bit. but it's kind of unclear as to what upper limit it can withstand, so I don't know. He's able to read minds, which would definitely help in a fight, and he's also able to summon or literally create canon, which is supposedly the strongest metal in the universe, which was literally capable of breaking the legendary Z sword. But just from what we've seen, I personally don't think Piccolo's statement and the statement from the data book is necessarily true, because something else we have to consider is that Piccolo is able to regenerate, and while Piccolo's regen isn't exactly on the same level as Buu, I'd argue it's at least on the same level as Perfect Cell here, because Trunks had ended up accidentally tipping over Piccolo's statue and breaking him into pieces. And once Tabora was defeated and Piccolo's body was turned to normal, it took almost no time at all for him to fully regenerate. And it's the exact same thing in both the manga and anime. Like, it literally takes no time at all. I think the best case we can make for Shin here is that he was able to hold off future Zamasu for long enough for Goku and Vegeta to return to their timeline. So maybe off of that, you could put Shin above Piccolo. Granted, that was a Dragon Ball Super feat, but I don't think Shin would have gotten so much stronger in between Buu arc and the future Trunks saga. So then there's the question, why did Piccolo forfeit the match against the Supreme Kai? If you're not under the impression that it was out of fear of strength difference, then there's really only one reason it could be, and that's out of respect. After all, Shin does note to himself that he realized that Piccolo, and of course Kami too, was once the guardian of the earth. So we probably realized that Piccolo feels the heaviness of Shin's presence here. It may all just depend on where you scale Piccolo by the time of the Buu Saga. Meaning, if you believe he's stronger than Goku was by the time of this fight with Cell, then in terms of raw power and fighting capabilities, Piccolo should be above Shin. Even if you say he's above him, maybe Shin's abilities are what give Piccolo some trouble. Especially with Shin being able to read minds, that could definitely help in regards to possibly figuring out what Piccolo's next attack will be. Before I give my ultimate answer on the fight, I'll say this. It's very tricky. If you go by straight statements and nothing else, Shin technically does scale above and beat Piccolo. But if you only go by from what we've seen in feats, then Piccolo should scale above and beat Shin. But in my personal opinion, I think Piccolo should take this more often than not. Just from what we've seen from both fighters, I feel like Piccolo should have an overall advantage to win this fight against Shin. I do think Shin's capability and his telepathy could give Piccolo some trouble, but unless Shin can completely take Piccolo's head off and damage it to the point where he can't regenerate, I don't know, y'all. I'm thinking Piccolo has this high difficulty at worst and mid difficulty at best. But yeah, like I said, I think ultimately Piccolo takes this. But I'm aware that people might be thinking I'm just biased towards Piccolo since he is my favorite Dragon Ball character, so I'll give you that if you think that. But Shin used to be my favorite character too, but he kind of starts lacking now. But there's the video. Hope you all did enjoy. Let me know in the video if I missed anything. Let me know in the comments if you liked the video or not. Let me know in the comments if you want me to do more Dragon Ball videos like this. Put them in the comments below. Thank you all for watching, and until my next one, like this know, out.